All right, so in this video, we're going to be talking about my approach to building game speed. So I'm going to talk about how I blend change of direction work into agility work and then have that go into game speed. So a quick overview of what this looks like. At the bottom, what we're first going to do is build the skills for change of direction. So we're going to focus on things like coming to balance, decelerations. Decelerations are going to be the main or the first primary part of change of direction. So being able to actually stop when on command whenever you need to, being able to manage the forces of high decelerations, and then from there, other skills of change of direction like inside load, like shuffle and crossover series, or the outside load like 45 and 90 series. You have your 180 turns and things like that. So with change of direction, that's the foundation of game speed, and that's going to be the first part that we look to work on with building skills for change of direction. After we build on the amount of skills for change of direction, we go on to building the tissue capacity by adding velocity to those skills that we worked on. So instead of just doing a coming to balance for 5 yards, we're actually adding velocity by adding yardage to it. So it might be a 10, 15, 20 yard coming to balance. So we're just increasing, we're building the tissue capacity by increasing the velocity that we have to slow down. Then from there, we go and progress it even higher to blending agility into it by adding reactionary components at the lower speed. So we kind of go back and drop the yardage and the velocity that we had to slow down, but we add reactionary components to it. So now it's going from change of direction to agility. We've already built the skills to do it. We've built the physical capacity, the tissue capacity to handle these change of directions and decels. Now we're just adding the reactionary component at lower speeds. Then from there, just like we did with change of direction, we start to add more velocity to this reactionary agility. So now we're doing 15, 20, 25, 30 yard change of directions or agilities with reactionary components to it. And then once we get that, so we have the tissue capacity, we have the ability to react and to react at high speeds. Now we get into our game speed work. So that's how you blend it all together from the bottom up. All right, so we're going to dive a little bit deeper on the foundation of change of direction, and we're going to talk about the change of direction skills to build on. So training COD techniques to change direction efficiently builds on the skills to perform movements such as like where to slide your foot, where to strike, your positioning, your body angle, and things like that. And the physical capabilities to handle the forces and the degrees of movement. So, we're handling forces, we're expressing strength, we're developing tendon resiliency, and we're developing our fascia and our dynamic mobility to handle these positions. So, when it comes to training change of direction techniques, we're just building the foundation, the physical capabilities to decelerate and change direction. And so the change of direction skills that I like to build on are going to be first, the foundation is coming to balance and decelerations. So this is just being able to decel, control your body, access an athletic stance, a split stance, be able to shuffle and stop on a dime. This is just purely deceleration. Then from there, we get to actually change in direction. So from an inside load, I like to work on my shuffle series. So lateral shuffle and change direction back the other way in a shuffle. My crossover run series. So crossover one way, change direction, and crossover the other way. And this is my inside load progression. So as we change direction, we're keeping the weight on our inside leg. Then we have our outside load series. So my 45 jab and my 90 jab series. Think about a receiver making a sharp cut on a dig route. So with things like this, with the outside load, my weight is on the outside leg as I change direction. And then I also have the rolling series, like the rolling 90 turns, the rolling 180 turns, a little bit more curvilinear in nature. But we're building the ability to change direction very smoothly and efficiently to where it's not really forced, it's more rhythmic in nature. Then the other change of direction skills that I like to build on are my back pedal brakes, curved change of directions, dip turns, 135 brakes, and et cetera, et cetera. But these are going to be the other skills to build on are going to be dependent on the sport that you play. So the foundation for all sports that I like to work on are the coming to balance, inside and outside load, and the rolling series. And so now we get to talking about the second part of how to progress change of direction. So the second part of that pyramid. And there's two primary ways that I will progress change of direction. One is by adding velocity. And by adding velocity, I mean increasing the buildup or the yardage of your change of direction, leading into the break, so you can increase the ability to withstand higher forces. So if I'm changing direction from a 5 yard break, so I build up 5 yards, cut, and change the other way, I have some speed, but I don't have a lot of speed. Now, if I sprint 20 yards and then change direction after sprinting max effort for 20 yards, I'm now being able to handle a lot higher forces because I built up a lot more speed over 20 yards that I would have in 5 yards. So by adding velocity, you get to increase the ability to withstand these high forces. Now, when it comes to, building up of the yardage and velocity, I usually have a max yardage that I build up to usually every off season. So that max yardage is usually between 20 to 40 yards. Now, when it comes to coming to balance, especially the athletic stance series, that'll be somewhere up higher, like 40 yards. Inside load, you can usually withstand more forces because you're technically breaking off of two legs. So that's moderately higher. And then outside load, mainly one leg and then slotting the other foot under the hip. So that's going to be moderately low, but that max yardage that I built up to is usually about 20 to 40 yards because that's what we experience in most power sports. Then the other way that I progress, change of direction, is adding degrees of movement. So this is just increasing the degree of bend, of tilt, of rotation, or increasing the movement demand of the brake. So instead of maybe just shuffling five and going the other way, I might shuffle five and touch a line, or I might shuffle five and pick up a ball and then change direction. So I'm just increasing the amount of tilt or the movement demand of that brake to get my body to access different positions and then be able to do work and express force and maintain structural integrity while I'm changing direction. And so now we're just talking about how I blend this change of direction work into agility work. So I just use the same movements and the same skills, but I remove the cones or the pre-planned aspect of the skill, and then I began doing those skills with the reactionary component. So there's different ways that you can build on change of direction by adding a reactionary component into agility. So you can use a verbal cue, like telling somebody, break on me, like shuffle five and then break, or shuffle and then break. It can be a reactionary person. So, fine. So now let's get into how to blend this change of direction work into agility. So now let's get into how to blend this change of direction work into agility. And the way I like to do that is I just use the same movements and the same skills that I built on in my change of direction work. And except now I remove the cones or the pre-planned aspect of the skill, and I begin performing those skills with the reactionary component because that's what agility is. Agility is just change of direction with a reactionary component. So it's not pre-planned. Now, there's a couple ways to do this. You can use a verbal cue. So telling somebody to, if I'm using a shuffle, for instance, tell them to shuffle and break on your cue. So shuffle and then break, and they break off of that. It can be in reaction to a person. So trying to mirror somebody, trying to evade somebody in a shuffle series. It can be in response to me throwing a ball or dropping a ball, whatever you want to use. But that's how you kind of blend change of direction work into agility work. You just use the same movements and skills and just add a reactionary component for them to react to and perform those same movements now on the fly to react with it. So how I do this is I start with low yardage and velocity, just like I did with my change of direction work. And then I add the yardage and velocity over time. And then as you turn this into agility, you add it more and more and more until you get to that upper threshold, like similar to what you do in change of direction. So I use change of direction work primarily in the early off season, and then the closer and closer we get to the season, we start to blend it more and more into agility work. Now, a quote that I find very helpful and very important to me as it comes to change of direction work and really agility work is that you can only react to what you can detect. So if you can't detect anything on the field, if you can't detect somebody coming at you from the side, or you can't detect somebody's movement and react off of that, you're going to be very vulnerable in your sport. So you need to be able to train agility and reaction because it's going to help you blend this change of direction agility into your game and be able to perform the movements on the fly very safely. So now we can get into the example of how I progress change of direction over time. Now, early in the off season, this is my approach. I pick the main skills that I want to work on. So somewhere usually around 4 to 6 skills that I want to work on really for that sport that matter the most. I introduce those skills at low yardage and speed. And then I progress the volume from weeks 1 to 2. So I just increase the capacity of the skill. And then I increase the velocity from weeks 3 to 4. So I improve the resiliency to handle these, velocities within the skill. And then I repeat. And I continue to do this until my upper limit is reached. So for example, say I want to build on 4 skills: my coming to balance linearly, my shuffle coming to balance, my inside load 180 cut, and my outside load 90 cut. Say this is for football. So for week 1, I might do 2 reps for every single skill. For my coming to balance, I might do 2 sets of 10 yards. And then for shuffle, 2 sets of 5 each. My 180 cuts, two sets of 5 each. And my 90 cuts, 2 sets of 5 yards each. Now, coming in week 2, I'm not going to add the velocity of it. So I'm not going to build the resiliency of it, but I'm going to add the total volume that I do. So I'm going to build the capacity to do work in that skill. So instead of doing 2 sets of 10 yards, I might do 4 sets of 10 yards for coming to balance stops, 3 sets of 5-yard shuffle stops, 3 sets of 5 yards, 180, and 3 sets of 590 cuts. So I'm still handling the same velocity and yardage, but I'm just increasing the amount of volume that I have with it. So I'm increasing the capacity. Then the next week, I go back down in total volume, but I increase the yardage and velocity. So instead of doing 10-yard coming to balance stops, I'm increasing the velocity and I'm stopping at 15 now. Now, instead of doing the shuffle stops at 5 yards, I'm doing it at 10. So I'm withstanding higher forces. Same thing with the 180 cuts. I'm doing 10 instead of 5. And then for the 90 cuts, I'm doing also 10 yards instead of 5 yards. So again, increasing the resiliency and the ability to withstand high forces. And then again, week 4, it says week 2, but week 4, I go back to adding more total volume. So back to week 3's velocity and yardage, but adding more volume of it to increase the capacity. And I'll continue to do that until it's time, about 1 to 2 months away from the season, to where I start to blend this into agility. With that in mind, now we'll conclude on talking about how I blend this change of direction work into agility work. So this is going to be my mid-off season to the early preseason approach. So what I'm doing is I'm just using the skills that I worked on in the early off season with change of direction work, and I'm introducing reactionary components at low yardage and low speeds. And then from there, I either add yardage and speed, or I'll choose to add the stress of scenario to progress the skill. So I'll, introduce, some threats or some reacting to a person on the fly or games and things like that. So I can increase their response that we get from them to change direction on the fly. And then I continue to add either yardage, speed, or stress until the season approaches. Then once the season is here, once fall camp or whatever the sport actual preseason arrives, I cut out agility volume completely because the sport has all of it. You get a lot of agility work from the sport itself. So from that point on, I just microdose a little bit of change of direction and max velocity and speed work in there as well. So here's an example of how I blend this change of direction work into agility. Based off the 4 skills that I worked on with my change of direction work, my linear come to balance, shuffle change of direction, inside load 180, and outside load 90, I'm going to build on this by adding the reactionary component. So say we get into the mid-off season, we're about 1 or 2 months away from, our preseason. What I'm going to do is go back to using low velocity and low total volume. So I might do the same things that I did with change of direction, but add a different reactionary component. So week 1, I have my coming to balance stops. Now I'm going to have my stops be on verbal cue. So I'm going to have it be off reaction to me. I tell you when to stop anywhere between 5 to 10 yards. Then we do my frame shuffle change of directions on reaction. So this is going to be, I might have somebody shuffle until I drop a ball. Then you shuffle and you stop between 5 to 10 yards, change the direction off of that. Then 2 sets of 5 to 10 yards of 180 cuts on a verbal cue. So someone runs and they're sprinting in a straight line. And then once I tell them to change direction, they'll quickly drop down into an inside load 180 full cut. And then the last one is 2 sets of 5 to 10 yards, 90 cuts on a person reaction. So I'm going to have them do a 5 to 10 yard sprint, and then I'm going to have somebody cut them off. And before they get to that person, they need to slot the foot outside of the center of mass, do a 90-degree cut, and react off that person. All of these things are just 2 reps of 5 to 10 yards each. That's how I have week 1 set up. Then week 2, all I'm going to do is add a rep to everything. I'm going to increase the capacity of them doing that work. So I'm just going to increase their ability to handle more volume of this agility work. Then week 3, I'm either going to add stresses. I'm going to increase the difficulty of games. I'm going to create more game-like environments, or I'm going to add yardage and velocity going back to that week 1 volume. So I might do 2 reps of everything at 10 to 15 yards an hour. And then week 4, I might do 3 sets of 10 to 15 yards. And then week 5 and 6, I might do 2 reps of 15 and 20 yards. And then the week after that, I may just add another rep. So all I'm doing is progressively kind of undulating how I increase the capacity to do work, so the total volume, or I'm increasing the yardage and velocity until we get to season. And then once we get in season, we don't have to work on agility. We've built up the physical capabilities to change the direction, not only from a muscular tendinous fascial level, but the skill itself. So being able to understand how to change direction. And then once we built that, we've added more capacity and resiliency. Then from there, we've blended that into agility. So I'm making it reactionary at lower capacities and lower resiliency levels, and then add stresses, add yardage and velocity to that. By that time, we're fully prepared to handle everything that the game brings us, and we're prepared to play our sport as fast and safely and efficient as possible. So this is my approach on building game speed. So from blending change of direction into agility to game speed. So I hope this helps you guys understand not only my perspective, but my rationale and how you also can take a long-term approach to building game speed with change of direction and agility from the early off season up until the season, and then basically doing it all over again, preparing for the next season.